I don't know if I'm supposed to adjust this or y'all just keep me straight or whatever. My wife's been trying to do it for 40-something years, so that has turned me on. No. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Well, I'm glad a few of you woke up after your New Year's celebration. Let's try it again. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Great. Good to have you here this morning, and I want to thank our pastor for giving me this opportunity. As many of you may know, he and his wife and family were able to go visit family. So we do want to pray for them as traveling mercies. I know there's some storms that are going around. We had the thunderstorms and rolling early this morning. We had family that was leaving a little before church started to go back up north to Chicago and then to Milwaukee. So they're facing 20 inches of snow up there, but they said, what's 20 inches of snow? You know, what's 13 below zero? I'm glad it's them and not me. Anyway, I noticed they were down here for the holidays, so we'll just leave it at that anyway. But we wish them traveling mercies for our pastor and his family. You know, it must be very difficult in the professional world, in any world, for instance, a dentist to have to go to another dentist to have their teeth. Have you ever thought about that? A physician to have to go to another physician to have a physical or to have an operation. It must be difficult because they're always second guessing. Maybe I wouldn't do it that way, and I don't want that way done on me. And it could be true for any field. One day, our custodian at the college that I worked with, the campus that I kept, was out, and we'd had a group of people that were there, and they were coming back the next day, and she was out with flu or whatever and came back after a couple of days. And she came back in and she said, I don't know who cleaned this building while I was out, but they did not. And she listed a whole bunch of things that they didn't do. I did not want to tell her, as dean, I was the one that stayed after hours and cleaned. I thought it looked pretty good, but evidently not to her standard. We don't like those standards. Well, one of the most difficult things must be a pastor to preach to a retired pastor. And I have to tell you, I retired back in 97 from the pastorate, and I've not always left church. I'm wondering sometimes, where did he get that, or where did she come up with those kind of words, or I didn't find that in my scripture anywhere. I'm not sure what version they were using, but I have to tell you, since coming here, there has not been a service that I have left without being fed. And I appreciate our pastor so much that he brings the Word of God and shares it with us time after time. And I know to be inspired and be able to share something new, we struggle sometimes to find a Sunday school lesson or to find a sermon. Think of it, how many times that you have to prepare and come up with something like that. And make sure you're carrying out God's message that he wants you to have. It's challenging, so I appreciate our pastor so much for what he does, as well as, I was going to say the backup group, but they're not. These people are just wonderful. Our organist and pianist, our pastor of music, the choir, and all of those that do everything, except for maybe that one guy in the handbell choir, Gene. No. I mean, Howard. It's Gene's fault. He invited me to come and play. So if it's really bad, blame Gene. Don't blame me. Anyway, it's beautiful and wonderful to be able to stand behind this sacred desk. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to do that. You know, I'm at a loss today. My church at one time threatened to take down the clock that was in the back and put up a calendar. And y'all have neither. So I remember, years ago, pastor or evangelist or whatever would take their watch off and lay it down. But I have one of these newfangled things my son got me, and it goes off. So, now it's on. Hang on a second, it'll go off. No. Anyway, so I'm not sure. I wish my dad was here. He passed away several years ago. My family has reminded me several times this week what my dad used to say. And he said it to me every time he came to hear me speak. Now, Howard, you can preach take all the time you want, speak as long as you want. There's not a problem, but at noon I'm getting up to go get lunch. And he would. So I wish Dad was here so he could tell me where to go. Now, I have got this thing all around me. I've got hearing aids in my ears, and they're over my ears. Glasses that are over my ears. Now this headset that's over my ears. So if I sneeze, y'all better duck. Stuff's going everywhere, just everywhere. Well, now, I want to confess to you this morning, I asked the pastor, had y'all ever done this? And he said no, and so he went ahead and left anyway, so I think it's okay for me to do this. I'm going to talk to you about something that I've been doing for 50 years, and I want to challenge y'all to do that. But in doing so, I'm going to be sharing from different versions of the Bible, and I wanted to warn you that up front. The first is, I'll be using the King James Version, and the reason I'll be using that is the first 30 years of my life, that's the scripture lessons that I learned, the verses that I memorized, and the times that I heard preach from was from the King James Version. It was pretty much all that we had. So when the Lord speaks to me, he speaks to me in Elizabethan English. So I hear the these and the thous. So forgive me if I use that. I'm not speaking in tongues this morning, just the way we used to talk using the Elizabethan English. So forgive me for that. But I'll be reading a few verses from the King James. And then the NIV. I bought this in 1983, shortly after they came out. And I preached from that until 97, and I've been using it, and I have all these marks going around the margins of my Bible from sermons that I heard and things that I underlined. So 40 plus years I used this version. Then I went to the CEV, which I love, but I never bought one because now it's on my phone. I don't know if you have a phone app that has a Bible, but I was looking the other day, and I think my phone app has 27 different versions. I didn't even know there were that many Bibles out there, but there's 27 different versions. And then my computer has an app that has even more. So I'm not going to use all of those, but today I'll just warn you up front, if you hear something a little strange, it's the King James or the NIV or the CEV is the versions that I'll be using for this morning. When I was in college, we had a professor that was talking to us about an evangelist, sometimes in the 1800s, but he used to describe preaching in this way, or I should say sharing the gospel in this way, because it speaks to all of us. He said, for each one of us, we must understand to spread the gospel is one beggar telling another beggar where the bread is. And that's what we have to do in life. Each one of us are ordained to do that, maybe not by an institution or by an association or by a denomination, but we're ordained by God as Christian believers to be that beggar, begging for grace, thanking God for grace, and telling others who are seeking it, this is where you can get the bread. And here's the great news, it's an unlimited supply, and that is just wonderful. It's hard to believe it was 50 years ago when I left home. It was even harder to believe when I came back and realized I couldn't find my way around Ringgold and Eastridge and the Chattanooga area that I grew up in. A lot of the places that I used to remember are gone. I remember one of my favorite stops was Pop's Drive-In up by in Eastridge by the tunnel. They had the best chili dogs there ever was. Have you ever eaten a chili dog at Pop's Drive-In? None of y'all? Oh, y'all don't know what living is. You people in Ringgold just didn't know what living was to eat one of them chili dogs. I mean, they were wonderful. And I used to always enjoy that whenever I got a chance to go up there to that drive-in and eat. It was great. And in B's Restaurant, have any of you eaten at B's Restaurant? I see a few people showing their hands. They don't want to stick them up and wave them, like we do at a ball game or anything like that, But yes, B's Restaurant, at least that's still there. But there's a lot of things that I don't remember. The Quickie down in Fort Oglethorpe or Rossville, we used to go down there and eat, and it's changed hands several times. Matter of fact, there's a lot of things that changed hands while I was gone over those 50 years. My parents, while they were alive, moved 5 times. Y'all, I was afraid they didn't want me to know where they lived when I come back to visit. They was afraid I'd come home to stay or something like that. So My siblings, they were really great by the time I got home. They've locked their doors. So, it's kind of scary thinking, that I was coming home to live, but we're glad to be here and be able to share with you. I want to talk to you about what happened to us 50 years ago. I left here, went to Iowa to go to college, and one of the greatest blessings of my life outside of my salvation is that of my wife. She has been a blessing to me, and I met her up there. She came from the suburbs of Chicago, and we met at Bible College in Iowa. Now, it was a very conservative college, and we had chapel 5 days a week, and you were expected to wear a coat and tie if you were a male to class, and females were expected to wear dresses when they went to class. And we had a family-style meal at night where you sit down and you knew to, I think, take with your right and pass with your left. Is that right? Or take with your left and pass with your right? My wife, this is the greatest supportive lie. I just said it 2 ways and she's shaking her head both ways. That's, you gotta love that. You gotta love that. And you addressed everybody, which was different up there. Now, they didn't do this. Down here, you were expected to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir. But up there, they said it during family-style meal, and outside of that, they didn't think you had to say it. And they would keep reminding me, Howard, we're not in family-style meal anymore. And I didn't understand what they mean, and we had to have a discussion about how to address those people that we held in respect. Then I realized it was because they didn't respect me that they didn't say yes sir, no sir. I'm teasing anyway. But 50 years ago while we were there, one of the greatest things that happened to us at the college was they challenged us to pray about a year verse. And they said, ask God for a promise that will help you for the unforeseen things that are going to happen in the next year. And the Bible is full of promises, and we don't claim those promises. One pastor I heard, he said, I claim God's promises. I claim every one of them. And he was up in years. Well, I was going to say up in years. He might have been my age back then, but it seemed like it was up in years back then. But he said, I want to tell you something. I believe God's word and the promises are like a bank. And when I get to heaven, I want to hear you're overdrawn instead of you have a bunch of money in there. He said, I want to claim every promise God has for me while I'm here on earth. And I think we need to share our promises. So I want to share with you this morning a little bit about our promises, some of the promises I had over my lifetime of the last 50 years, because I'm celebrating 50 years today, my 50th anniversary of having year verses. And then I want to share the one that God has given me for 2022. 1972, the first one was Isaiah 40:31, King James Version, in case you want to know. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And I had no idea what the next 4 years, 5 years, turning out to be 9 years, and I'll tell you a little bit of that in just a minute, that God had for us. But this was the promise that he had us to claim. 1973, my year verse that year was, be still and know that I am God. And in 1973, I didn't know what was going to be happening, but they had some tryouts for a team that traveled from the college and would travel for the year. You'd be on scholarship. You traveled all during the summer. Almost every weekend you were in different churches or different camps or different conferences, and you were singing and taking part of that. At camps, you'd be teaching lessons and living in the dorms and doing things like that. And I had no idea the importance of this promise of be still and know that I am God, until you're given out every day and your body is aching and you're tired and you don't think you can take another step, yet somebody else wants to know about the goodness of God and what they should be doing for their life, and you've been placed in that position to be able to share. That's when you know the importance of being still and know that I am God. Over the next 9 years, 4.5 years as a student, and then 4.5 years, well, I was still a student, but 4.5 years I was on staff. I was still learning, as I'm still learning today. But I would travel And the Lord blessed in so many ways. My wife and I were able to travel coast to coast and border to border. I've been in all 48 continental United States and preached in many churches. I can't tell you how many different denominations and associations and camps and conferences. What a privilege to be able to do that. But in order to do that, oftentimes we were traveling from place to place by vehicle. And you would be getting up in the morning at 5 o'clock to travel the 400 miles that you needed to get to the dinner that you were going to have that night, 2 hours ahead of time to set up the equipment and then to get yourself ready to meet the people as they started coming in. And people would come in sometimes from 50, 60, 100, 150 miles because they knew you wouldn't be in their area and they wanted to come up and reconnect. And they'd drive to the meeting that night. They'd come early and they'd want to talk with you. You'd stay in someone's home and they want to talk with you afterwards, oftentimes midnight, 1 or 2 o'clock before you got to sleep, only to get up at 4 o'clock and be on the road to 5 o'clock the next day. Be still and know that I am God. But they that wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. These are the promises that God has given us that we can live in each and every day. 1981, I went to the pastoral ministry, and I believe God has a great sense of humor. He called me to the pastorate. I'll tell you something. I am an extreme introvert. Everything you see today is learned behavior. Everything that I do, I've been sitting there sweating. They said, don't leave you sweat. That's why I wore this wool coat. Hopefully, or corduroy coat. Hopefully, I won't sweat through it today. But every time I get up to speak, I get nervous. Every time I get up to sing, not to mention, I didn't have to worry about ringing those bells a lot. It was natural. I was shaking back there, let me just tell you. But you get up before, and I believe God has a great sense of humor. If you don't think God has a sense of humor, just take a moment, wherever you're at today, and look to the people sitting to the left or right of you. God has a great sense of humor. You thought it was just me you were laughing at. Look out there at all of y'all, yes. And when you get home, look in the mirror. God has a great sense of humor. But he has a great one. And here's the verse that he gave me as a promise when I was entering the ministry. And for the next several years, 1 Corinthians 1:27, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty. Let me tell you something. I felt that to the very depth of my soul when he was calling me into the pastorate. It's not the job that I wanted. It's not the career that I wanted. It's not where I wanted to go, but it's where God wanted me to be. And I could think of a million things, like watching for forest fires up in one of those towers, the top of Smoky Mountains. That would be where I would choose to be and not have anybody else around me. But that's not what God chose. And we have to be willing and we have to be prepared and know that he would prepare us. When I was called into the pastorate, I remember, like Moses, I was saying, God, don't send me, send my brother. And Gene wouldn't go. So I had to go. And there I was, and we left there, and I said, the last place, God, I'll go anywhere, but I will not go to California. Guess who ended up in Sacramento? Yep, 4 years I pastored out there. I'm not Catholic, but if I was, I've already been through, what's that pre-heaven or hell where they go? Yeah, thank you. That's where I've already spent it. I've been in California. But anyway, I better go on. It did not only, that verse, even though it was for that year, didn't just end that year, but it was for the next years. Throughout my pastoral ministries there, from 1981 to 1997, but also as I entered graduate school at the University of Georgia. My master's program, I decided to go into the religion department. They weren't sure they wanted a conservative Christian there. They had Buddhists, they had Hindus, they had Islamists, they had Jewish. They had all kinds of religions, and they even had Protestants. They just weren't sure they wanted a conservative Christian. And God helped me, and I'm not a good student. And Mr. Ball could tell you that. He had me for band for a number of years. He tried to do the best he could, but he didn't do very well. But anyway, when I went there, somehow God interceded in a miraculous way, and I graduated the top of my class with the top honors of the scholarship program that they had. And I thank God for that, because they didn't want a conservative Christian there. But he was able to, and he opened so many doors for me to share. Then it was shortly after that, about a year and a half later, that I entered into back into the graduate school to work on my doctorate. I wanted to earn a doctorate for me. I needed the education. There was so much I didn't get. I wasn't a good student. I enjoyed high school, but I wasn't what you'd call a student. That might be the wrong word to use. And also in college, I enjoyed it, and I graduated with a 1.99, and you need a 2.0 to graduate. So I believe in social promotion, folks, let me tell you. And I'm just thankful that I was able to get through it, and they let me out. But anyway, I went up there to the University of Georgia, and they let me in. But I know there was so much I needed to share, and there was so much I needed to learn. And then God gave me a wonderful dissertation to write, topic, and I wrote on faith and crisis and faith development. And I can't believe the number of doors that opened up at the University of Georgia and in other universities to go and share what I had learned as a student, but to be able to talk to them about crisis and faith development was just unreal. 1990, my wife and I had been married 15 years. We were both 37. I received this, and my year verses come. This was about December sometime in 89, but in 90, I received this verse: humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. And in September of that year, we were blessed with a precious son. He was a bundle of joy when he was born. He's 31 now, and he's still a bundle of joy. And I still think of him as my boy. I know he's a man, because I have to look up to him, but what a treat and an unexpected blessing that God gave us then. In 2021, this is the last verse that I'll share, to my year verse for this year, 2021, Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We came home over the holidays, and we're talking. I'd already received this as my year verse for the next year. Had no idea what God had in store. But after coming home for the holidays and driving back, my wife and I decided, it was time for me to go ahead and retire. I'd been planning on retiring when I was 65, and then 66 and 67, and I'd set April 1st as the day to retire. I thought that would be great. April Fools, all those people that had to go in, and I get to stay home. That would be a great time. But that's not what the Lord had in mind. And when we came home that day, and we decided it was time. We decided the next few days we would call a realtor. And we did call that realtor, and we sat down and talked with her. I believe it was January 12th. And she said, administrations are changing. We don't know what happens when administrations changing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and put your house on the market before. And she said, it'll take about 3 or 4 months for it to sell. Joke was on all of us. So we put our house up for sale on the 19th at 6 o'clock. They were bidding all night long online, and by noon on the next day, on Thursday, it was sold. We hadn't packed a thing. We didn't know where we were going to live. My family locked their doors. We said we're going to move up there. Aren't you excited? Anyway, I just have to tell you, we had no idea. It was April before we were able to buy a house and move in. In that time, Sherry was living here with our son and being with family. They love her. And they were excited about that. And I was still working back at the college and worked there until June 30th. But we so love it here. We found a loving church family, wonderful pastor, wonderful pastors' families, pastors, I say that plural, who serve us in so many ways. I was telling our pastor, Pastor Eric, I guess that goes for either one of them, but I was telling our music pastor Eric when he was walking out the other night, I said, you've got to be exhausted. I mean, we'd had music after music. Where was the choir and the youth kids? I mean, all kinds of music that was going. He had to be exhausted. And he was as energetic and ready to go. I'm about to lose this. Y'all might be praying it goes. But anyway, there was so much that was going on. And we've have all of this as part of it. And what a blessing that God had. But we had no idea he was going to work the way that he worked. But let me tell you, February, March, I was wondering, are we ever going to find a place to live? Sherry would look all during the week, and I'd come home on weekends, and it was already sold. And then we were looking at just dirt because they put pictures up of the houses they were going to build, and we thought, oh, boy, 3 more months, and we'll be able to get that house. And by the time we were thinking about it overnight, the next day it was sold. So we were looking, but God placed us right where he wanted. His blessings supersede anything we could imagine. And that's what I want to talk to you about, promises. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 7 and 10. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a land of brooks, of water, of fountains and springs, flowing out in the valleys and the hills. I just want to thank God for the wonderful storm we had to make everything I just read picturesque in my drive up Alabama Highway this morning, because I saw, listen to it, he's bringing you into land of brooks, of water, of fountain and springs flowing out of the valleys and the hills. About halfway up between here and our home, there is I'm going to lose this. There is a bridge, and we were wondering why the bridge was here. Sherry, did you see the river this morning? Well, now it's lake. We could call it Howard's Lake. What do you think? Not interested. Anyway, it'll be dried up before long. But anyway, I was thinking of that, how picturesque God makes everything. And then go on in verse 10, and you shall eat and be full, and ye shall bless, or you shall, there's the Elizabethan English, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Now, just briefly, real quick. The Israelites had just spent 40 years in the wilderness, their entire existence. And there, in one part, if you read about it, it talks about our entire existence. A new generation of Israelites have been poised to take over the position of the land, the promised land of Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, the land that Moses had led them out of Egypt and into that promised land. And of course, they'd rejected it. And because of their rejection, they spent 40 years out there until everyone who rejected it had died. Now there was a new generation poised to go in and take care of the land. God had given them some very specific things that they're supposed to do. I'm reading the Bible through this year. I started back in about 3 months ago, and I came upon this, and I was just challenged by reading this and what God had to say to them and pour out to them. And I hope you'll take time to read some of that over the years. But one of the things that he said here in that is that you must possess the land. You must tear down the altars. You must put everything in honor of God and take everything else away. The scripture tells us our God is a jealous God, and he is. He loves us. He's given everything for us, and he in turn wants us to give everything to him. Yet we still have idols around. We still have things that we put before him. And you have to answer that question if there's something between you and God. No one else can. But that's what he was challenging the children of Israel. And he was telling us the same thing today. He speaks to us today about taking care of everything except for what's for God. After a while, it says, Joshua died about 30 years after they moved into the promised land. And everything hadn't been conquered. They just hadn't had time. But in his last words, he was telling the people and challenging them to finish the task that God has for you. And he talks about those people that were up in the mountains. He talks about some of the cities that were yet to be conquered. And he made promises and promises that were where the land has been divvied out and given to the Israelites. And he says, you go, the different tribes, you go and take care of your lands. Now they talked with some of the other tribes and had those tribes come over, and they went. But we find out more often than not, they were satisfied with what they had, and they let those that were remaining just stay. If they went up in the hills that they weren't interested in, they just let them go. There were some idols there that they decided was nice structures, and they would just leave them there. And not look at them as idols, but just as, art for the day. And they had all these promises that were laid out before them, but God had made it very clear to them, tear them down, remove them. And just 30 years after Joshua dies, we start seeing that they have begun to worship at those altars. Those altars they looked at as just as art, just as something beautiful to look at, was not what God wanted to remain, because he knew what would happen, and their hearts were drawn to those things. I'm gone. Maybe you can still hear me. Not as professional as you thought, but maybe, I don't know. Anyway, he said, this is yours, and this is your promise. Take your promise. Make it work for you. But he didn't. They didn't. And as we see here, they soon gave in. It says that God became angry. Judges 2:10-14. And after a while, the people of Joshua's generation died. And the next generation did not know the Lord or any of the things that he had done for Israel. The Lord had brought their ancestors up out of Egypt, and they had worshipped him. But now the Israelites stopped worshiping the Lord and worshiped the idols of Baal, as well as the idols of others gods from nearby nations. The Lord was so angry that the Israelites, that he let other nations raid Israel and steal their crops and other possessions. Enemies were everywhere, and the Lord always let them defeat Israel in battle. The Lord had warned Israel that he would do this, and now the Israelites were miserable. There's rewards for obedience and listening to what God has to say. That land of plenty. The land that I mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 7-10. Those things are ours for the taking. They're mine for the taking. That's the promise God has given me. But there's some things that I must do to have those rewards. Miraculous protections, deliverance, provisions from following the instructions of God is entirely based on my dependence on God. It had been easy 50 years ago to say, God, send somebody else. It had been easy to allow circumstances over the last 50 years to take hold, and I could tell you of some terrible circumstances that has fallen our way. But yet God said, if you will obey me. One of the difficult things about reading the Scripture and the Bible that we have here before us is that we read in a few minutes the hardships, and then we read a few minutes later, if you stay there, an hour or two later, you can read of the victories. But we forget in some of those trying times, there's 30 years of difficulty. Joseph, when his brothers sold him into slavery, it was 12 years that he was imprisoned after hearing those men say, hey, when we stand up before the king, we'll remember you. 12 years he spent in jail for no reason, except that that's where he needed to be until God opened the door. We read in just a few minutes of the victories, but we forget the years. And we have to endure years sometimes. All of us here. We're facing difficult times in our nation. We've been facing some difficult times. And I'm not just talking about the virus, but it's other things. Our economy, there's just a lot of things that are happening. The thing is, are we going to endure it? Are we going to do what God wants us to do and step in the way that he wants us to go? Our dependence on God, and I like this, for his help, for his guidance. And I like the word sustenance. Mr. Ball always challenges us in our Sunday school class, and he talks about going to Webster's Dictionary. So I did the same thing. I thought if he could use it, so can I. Sustenance. Maintaining of something or someone in life's existence. Supporting life. And I thought that's exactly what we need by relying on God. The results of disobedience are there as well. God was angry. He does not get angry with us unless we deserve it, unless we bring it on ourselves. I'm talking recently, and I remember one of the Psalms that David wrote, and he says, don't allow sin in your anger. And we want to dismiss anger, but anger is an emotion that we have, a true emotion. And we just have to learn how to control it and deal with it. God was angry because of their disobedience. Just over 30 years after Joshua's death, just over 30 years after all those wonderful victories, just over 70 years from the wonderful deliverance of 400 years of living under the whip in Egypt, they had forgotten all of it. As I was reading this, I was wondering, whose fault? Was it the kids that wouldn't listen? Was it the parents who didn't teach the lessons? Was it the things that they allowed to set up in the mountain that came down and began to infiltrate their families and their friends and ultimately destroy their faith? Promises remind us of the goodness of God. Promises challenge us to prepare for the future unknown. And the challenges and the rewards, promises are often accompanied with a set of standards for us to live by. Promises. I decided years ago, my doctor asked me when we go down to visit her, we go about every 6 months, and she said, Howard, are you always laughing? Are you always happy? I hear your laughter when you come into the office. I hear you out there. I decided I'm not going to let circumstances and situations dictate the way I live for God. Do I get tired? Yes. Do I hurt? Oh, yes. I remember what my mom said, and it's so true. It's not the years, it's the mileage. And I've got the mileage, trust me. But it's not all that we could give into. Every one of us have circumstances. Every one of us have situations. Every one of us have difficult things in our life. It's a given. A man was talking one day. He was laughing, having a good time at work, and the people just thought, my goodness, look at his life. He must have a wonderful time. So a couple of the men went into a townhouse and went up on the roof and was watching him as he came home that night, and they thought, my goodness, no wonder. Look, there's his wife. She's serving him things out the glass door, and he's sitting there on the deck when he comes home. She met him as soon as she got there, and they said, no wonder this man is always happy. He's just treated like a king when he gets home. It was only a week later when they found out that his wife had met him there on the deck with the divorce papers, and the things that was sitting there in the boxes were things that she'd packed his clothes in, and she was sending him off. But he still showed up every day with a happy face. See, circumstances and situations wasn't going to dictate to him. Did he hurt? I'm sure. Was he sorrowful things had to end that way? You know. Yet we have to determine how we're going to put our front on to the world. Are we going to live God's promise? Are we going to be God's promise? It's your challenge today. I hope all of you will take an opportunity to ask God for a promise for this year. And then as you look back over the year, all those things that are happening in your life and how that promise is fulfilled in the things that God has for you.